China, the nation's biggest destination for ICT exports, saw an on-year increase for the eighth consecutive month in June. Shipments to other nations such as the United States and the European Union also rose, but there was a slump in exports to Japan. Meanwhile, ICT imports last month dropped 5.1% on year due to fewer inbound shipments of chips and rechargeable batteries. As for the first half of the year, ICT exports rose 28.2% to 109 billion US dollars, the second largest amount of exports on a 6-month basis. This was also driven by outbound shipments of chips rising nearly 50% on year on the back of strong demand. During the January to June period, other tech exports such as displays and computers saw a double-digit increase compared to the previous year. And exports to China during this period rose more than 37% on year. Imports, on the other hand, fell on year, leading to a trade surplus of $41 billion. 이수진, 아리랑 뉴스.
This year marks the 200th anniversary of the cultivation of potatoes on the Korean peninsula. Potatoes were an emergency crop that was a great food source during periods of austerity. Now, South Korea has become a nation that exports seed potatoes even to countries where they originated. Our Cha Young reports.
This place filled with glass houses is the Highland Agriculture Research Institute, the #1 research center for potatoes in Korea. It is a prerequisite to ensure disease-free seed potatoes, since the tuber exhibits clonal propagation, which can pass viruses onto the next generation. In this place, 160,000 disease-free seed potatoes are produced using hydroponics with additional nutrients such as calcium and magnesium. Potatoes arrived in South Korea in 1824 during the reign of King Sunjo of the Joseon dynasty, becoming a major food source during times of austerity. In 1961, official research into potato cultivation began with a specialized research institute being opened in Daegwallyeong. The research center successfully developed new technology to produce and replicate disease-free seed potatoes through hydroponics in the early 1990s for the first time in the world.
Dr. Woo Jang-chun set up the research center here in Daegwallyeong, where the cool climate is ideal for growing potatoes in summer.
The center has promoted 47 species of potatoes so far, establishing South Korea as an advanced country that exports disease-free seed potatoes to 20 countries in Africa, Asia, and even South America, where potatoes were first cultivated. The United Nations Potato Research Center is also trying to introduce Korea's technology for producing seed potatoes. The World Development Administration held an international symposium highlighting the history and achievements in research and development of potato cultivation through international cooperation, marking the 200th anniversary of the introduction of potatoes to Korea. Now, Korean seed potatoes are in the global spotlight as they have also become a source for cosmetics and medical supplies production beyond food resources. Cha Young, Arirang News.
China's economy slowed in the second quarter, missing growth estimates due to weak domestic demand. Data from Beijing's National Bureau of Statistics on Monday showed that the country's GDP in the second quarter of the year rose 4.7% year-on-year. This is lower than the 5.1% growth predicted by analysts in the Reuters poll and the 5.3% expansion seen in the previous quarter. Retail sales rose by 2%, below the forecast of 3.3%, putting pressure on policymakers to boost the market as they start China's high-level policy meeting, the third Plenum, on Monday. In the Middle East, Israeli airstrikes continued in Gaza over the weekend, with the most recent hitting a school, killing more civilians, including children. Our Ian Jin reports.
On Sunday, another school in the Nuseirat refugee camp in central Gaza was struck by Israeli airstrikes. At least 17 people, mostly women and children, were killed, and 80 were wounded in a strike on the UN-run Abu Araban school, which Gaza's civil defense agency says was housing thousands of displaced people. The Israeli military said the operation was against terrorists who triggered the start of the war with their attack on Israel on October 7th. This is the fifth attack on a school since July 6th, with Israel saying that Hamas uses schools, hospitals, and other public infrastructure for military purposes, which Hamas denies. It also follows Israeli attacks on Saturday night on the Al-Mawasi refugee camp in Khan Yunis that killed at least 90 people and injured hundreds. The Israeli military claimed that the target of their attack on Saturday was Hamas commander Mohammed Deif and the commander of the Khan Yunis brigade Rafah Salameh. Israel has accused both of masterminding the Hamas-led October 7th attack on southern Israel. But with no confirmation of whether the targets were struck, Hamas says only defenseless civilians were killed. The Al-Mawasi attack on a designated humanitarian safe zone in Gaza was condemned by the United Nations and countries across the Middle East. Egypt, among mediators working toward a ceasefire deal, said that the ongoing violations would only add serious complications to reaching an agreement. Meanwhile, the United Nations says the attacks may have breached international law, adding to a UN report from March that Israel may be committing genocide in Gaza. Ian Jin, Arirang News.